And now, your daily dose of debate, breaking news, and uncensored views. This is the Michael Medved Show.
And another great day in this greatest nation on God's green earth, and a great day to remember a feature of the immediate past for many Americans, which was the war against Iran. Well, it's back. We are in the midst of fighting again, exchanging fire with the Iranians. They are not on the point of surrender. They are not desperately trying to negotiate a deal. They are, in fact, hitting America and America's allies in the Middle East, including the nation of Jordan. We will bring that to you. There's also another war going on, and that war is the war against socialism, which is surging today, particularly within the Democratic Party. Is it reasonable to expect that the socialist explosion of energy would not only move the Democratic Party to the left, but maybe replace the Democratic Party, replace it altogether? People used to talk about Trump and MAGA were a hostile takeover of the mainstream Republican Party, the Reaganite Republican Party. Well, what about the hostile takeover of the Democrats, such as they are? We'll be talking about that with Matt Bai, who has written a profoundly insightful column, it seems to me, about why it is that socialism simply is not going to work as a political initiative in the United States of America. Meanwhile, the market had a disastrous day yesterday, lost over 1,000 points for the Dow Jones, but now it's partially back, maybe 500 points it will end up with. Who knows? For years, Trump said he would grow the GDP to 6%, or at least 5%. Well, right now, the GDP has slowed to a 1.5% growth, and that's not exactly the golden age that President Trump promised. The war in Iran, spreading throughout the Middle East, has an economic impact as well. And meanwhile, there is a preoccupation, at least among several members of the U.S. Senate. It's not a Senate majority, but it's enough Senate members of the Republican side to matter, who believe that the Fauci fury needs to be avenged. Some senators say he is a villain who, with his vaccines, which actually were developed as part of the Warp Speed initiative that President Trump championed, that initiative, that those vaccines about COVID-19 murdered over 9 million Americans. Okay, why would Dr. Fauci have tried to do that? We will investigate the very latest and the latest claims and counterclaims coming up on the Michael Medved Show. And the United States launched a fresh round of strikes against Iran today, this morning, ending a days-long pause in direct attacks on targets inside the country. The strikes followed Iran's Wednesday ballistic missile attacks on U.S. assets in Jordan, which said it intercepted all 5 missiles, and that came hours after Trump warned it was Washington's, quote, turn to hit Iran very hard. The U.S. Central Command said the 2-hour wave of strikes hit dozens of Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps targets, including command centers, missile and drone facilities, and other military and surveillance sites. CENTCOM also said it participated in Saudi Arabia's strikes on Iran-backed militias in Iraq, citing militia-directed drone attacks on U.S. soldiers. The Popular Mobilization Forces, an umbrella group for the militias, said that the attacks killed at least 20 and wounded 32 of its fighters, and included airstrikes on the Baghdad headquarters and 6 other locations. Despite the strikes, Qatar resumed shipments through the Strait of Hormuz today, sending its first liquefied natural gas cargo in 3 weeks. Meanwhile, Poland is blaming Russia for firing a missile deep into Polish territory during a wave of deadly long-range strikes across Ukraine that killed at least 8 people. Earlier, Poland said it scrambled fighter jets in response to the large-scale Russian attack on Ukraine. And for people who may not be familiar with the history, Poland used to be part of Russia. It was an empire on its own, and a powerful empire going back to the Middle Ages. But Poland basically ceased to exist as an independent nation in 1815. And during that period of time, it was ruled very cruelly by Russia and then later by the communist regime. And Poland is blaming Russia for that missile. The idea of Poland being drawn into the war would be problematic indeed. There is also this, which is very relevant to the upcoming midterm elections, which are hitting us in less than 100 days. Voters are now agitating for wholesale change in Congress, and the majority of voters are looking to the Democrats in the hopes of getting that change. Democrats now lead Republicans on the generic ballot by 8 points among registered voters, that according to a new CNN poll conducted by SSRS. Democrats also continue to hold a significant advantage in voter enthusiasm, and they have a 20-point advantage in preference among those who say they are extremely motivated to vote. In other words, when it comes to people who are virtually sure to actually get out there and vote, even if the president makes it more difficult to vote by mail, more Democrats say they are sure to vote than Republicans say so. More Americans say the country would be better off, 38%, than worse off if Democrats were to take control of Congress. 38% say we'd be better off. 33% say we would be worse off if Democrats win control of the Congress this November. 29% say it wouldn't make any difference, which is sad because it indicates people aren't paying any sort of meaningful attention. In an indication of the hunger for drastic change in Washington, a majority of voters say that Congress would be better off if most of its current members were unseated in this fall's election, higher by double digits than the share who felt that way ahead of the Democratic wave election in the midst of the Iraq War that was back in 2006. There is much more, plus questions about more scandals and their impact on who controls the next Congress, particularly with a race in Ohio that hadn't been considered in play before the last week. We will be right back on that and much more coming up on the Medved Show. And coming up on the Michael Medved Show, we will be speaking with columnist Matt Bai, who has a very pertinent and pressing question that he wants to pose. The question is, will the socialist surge which has gotten so much attention and generated so much controversy and energy, will that socialist surge doom the Democrats? It could. And what does that depend on? We will get to that coming up on the Medved Show. Meanwhile, President Trump has been very clear about the threats of expanding, returning to U.S. strikes against the Iranians. And there's always that possibility of a ground assault, boots on the ground, which is also something that might be in the offing for the United States of America. The commander-in-chief warned the U.S. is prepared to respond after recent drone attacks, including against our allies in Egypt. Here's what the president had to say about that. This is clip 20.
On the attack, the drone attack on the LNG tanker off of Egypt. Yeah. What can you tell us about that? And is there any indication it's Iran related? Does it represent?
Well, I'll give you a report. I've been briefed. It's a little more of the same, but it's going to be straightening out. It's going to be straightening out. In the meantime, we're going to be hitting them very hard because it's our turn to hit them. They know it's coming. They're asking us not to do it, but they tried shooting it last night. So we had 5 rockets shot going 8,500 miles an hour, and all 5 rockets were knocked down to the ground. But they nevertheless took a shot. So it's our turn. And we'll see if we get there with an agreement at some point, but we're going to hit them very hard.
Okay, it's our turn, and we're going to hit them very hard. We will report on that as it develops. But there's a military expert, a retired lieutenant general named Keith Kellogg. He's been a guest on the show. And he is a military expert for the Fox News network. And he most recently has come forward to say that it is urgent for President Trump to change strategy in Iran. Why and how? This is clip 30.
He said we're close. How close do you think we are? And can we finish this?
Well, Sandra, I don't think we're close in that regard of finishing the job if we're just dependent on bombing. Look, they've got a philosophy it's called Mosaic, which is their defense policy. And if you look at it and you look at their principles of negotiation that their foreign minister wrote, Arachi wrote, this is in their game plan. They plan to extend this fight. So I think that's where the president gets his advisors and say, what are we doing wrong, or what should we do differently that we're not doing right now? I don't think we're there yet. I haven't seen it. I'm sure he's got great advisors. They're telling him what to do, or not telling him what to do. They're giving advice. You don't tell the president what to do. But I think they should be giving him advice that's a little bit hard and a little bit different than we're doing right now. Bombing is not going to get the job done. One of these days, you have to think really hard about doing this just like the Romans did it. Someday you have to put soldiers in the mud. That doesn't mean invading Iran, but you need to take out potentially strategic targets, figure out what they are, and go after them.
Going after them is something it is unclear that we are doing. There's also a very different point of view on that. Reza Pahlavi, who is the son of the former Shah of Iran. He has been said to have a certain level of popularity in the country, though those folks did not turn out as President Trump expected them to at the very beginning of the war back in February when we started bombing Iran. But Reza Pahlavi was speaking to reporters about the next steps he would like to see the U.S. take to win the Iran war and maybe give him a chance of returning to a pro-American leadership. Wouldn't that be something in the nation of Iran? Here is Reza Pahlavi. He's clip 19.
Steps do you want to see the U.S. government take on Iran next? What's the next step you want to see the U.S. government take on Iran, given that the war is escalating now?
Support the Iranian people and to make sure that they realize that it's all ultimately a matter of freeing ourselves from this evil force, and we're standing our ground, and hopefully the world will be on our side this time.
And hopefully the world will be on our side this time. You certainly will have a lot of Arab nations, Muslim nations, that will be sympathetic to getting rid of the Iranian mullahs and their proxies, including very much the Houthis and Hezbollah and Hamas and this new group in Iraq, which involves Shiite militias and danger to America and our allies. There is meanwhile also an opinion on Fox Business. And yes, of course, there's an interaction between business and the state of our economy and what is going on in Iran. Larry Kudlow, economic expert with Fox Business, talked about his belief that it's time to return to major combat operations. This is clip 7.
It's time to return to major combat operations and economic strangulation and covert finding to overthrow, to make regime change. That's my take anyway.
Well, that is a take for many people. There is also a big new breaking news item from NBC News. They are suggesting that President Trump is increasingly exasperated about the situation in Iran. And of course, with the war dragging on and this unpopularity of the war coming up to the midterm elections in less than 100 days now, is there a Hegseth problem that is also part of this exasperation they're reporting for President Trump? We will get to that and to more on the top officials trying to agree on the right strategy. Coming up on the Medved Show.
The greatest show on God's green earth.
Listen.
It's the Michael Medved Show.
Listen.
And the headline over at NBC News says Trump exasperated on Iran as top officials cannot agree on strategy, sources say. The report says that the president erupted at some of his top national security officials during a recent meeting, according to a U.S. official and a person familiar with the heated discussion. President Trump is weighing, says the story, his next move on Iran, and his top aides and allies cannot agree on a path forward, according to people familiar with the discussions. And then there's another point of view of this same frustration that apparently President Trump feels. The Wall Street Journal running a report that says the U.S. commander with a 2-week plan to escalate strikes in Iran. They're not clear, of course, because they want some element of surprise or frustrating the other side. They're not entirely clear of what those strikes would involve or where they would be directed. But the source of this is Admiral Brad Cooper, who President Trump, it says in the story, was sitting aboard Air Force One on the tarmac in Delaware last week, having just watched the caskets of 4 U.S. soldiers killed in the Iran war arrive from overseas. He was huddling with his top war advisors, General Dan Kane who is chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Defense Secretary, or he prefers to be called the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. Also aboard the plane in the impromptu meeting was Admiral Brad Cooper, head of the U.S. Central Command, which has been quietly directing the war from his Tampa, Florida headquarters, and who had arrived separately for the solemn ceremony. That Admiral Cooper has a 2-week plan to escalate the strikes, apparently. Now, of course, this is reminiscent of President Trump in many items of predicting what's next in the war, what's next with the economy, what's next with tariffs. Always gives the allowance of 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, we'll have this settled. In 2 weeks, we will have this clear. In 2 weeks, we will have a direct vision of where we are going, where we are headed, and what the goals really are. And this, again, is another 2-week plan before we get a clear strategy for finishing this war in Iran. And what is so frustrating about all of this is the Iranians appear to have their own strategy, their own commitment to refuse to lose. They are not willing to make any sorts of meaningful concessions on their nuclear program and what's left of it, or about the control of the Strait of Hormuz, where they have been extremely insistent that they will at least need to have partial control of the Strait of Hormuz when it had been wide open for all kinds of international shipping before our attack against Iran in February, which is getting to be a long time. Meanwhile, speaking of getting to be a long time, there is a great deal of continued attention to the Fauci hearings, the Fauci diary, the Fauci fury. The New York Times headline says volatile hearing as Fauci invokes Fifth Amendment. Senate COVID-19 panel. Rand Paul threatens to hold him in contempt as the feud continues. They write, Cheryl Gay Stolberg writes, Dr. Anthony S. Fauci refused yesterday to answer questions from a Senate committee, repeatedly invoking his constitutional right not to incriminate himself before a panel dominated by very hostile Republicans who accused him of causing the coronavirus pandemic and insinuated that he enriched himself while Americans died. The hearing was part Washington theater, part political Rorschach test, highlighting deep partisan divisions over Dr. Fauci, who spent nearly 40 years as the government's top infectious disease expert, advising presidents of both parties and generating bipartisan respect until his efforts to curb the spread of the COVID-19 turned him into a polarizing figure. Considering the unquestioned success of Operation Warp Speed in developing a vaccine, getting the vaccine used and employed and around the country, and considering where we are now today as composed to where we are at the height of the pandemic, is it really appropriate to go forward as one U.S. Senator did, Tommy Tuberville of Alabama? He went on to Newsmax and talked about Dr. Fauci as a mass murderer.
It was a federal pardon from an auto pen. Joe Biden never really signed it. Somebody else did. So that will be contested. We'll see how far that goes. But this guy, Fauci, has got to live with it every day. He had the little man syndrome. He thought he was bigger than life. But I hope that, and we'll look at everything. Hopefully in the next 6 months, I'll be the governor of the state of Alabama. And I promise you one thing, we will find out if there's a possibility that we can bring him to Alabama to put him in front of a court and a jury to see if we can put this guy in prison. He killed millions of people, folks. I mean, this was a catastrophe. And he also broke the United States of America. We're absolutely broke for what we spent. When I got here in 2000 or 2021, Joe Biden and these brainless Democrats up here spent almost $6 trillion that we didn't have to spend. They shut the country down. Our kids couldn't go to class. It was all by design. Again, Fauci just fell into all this. He thought he was a hero. He thinks a hero because it's going to cost him every dime that he's earned from all these books and all these speeches he gives. We're going to make sure he goes to court and pays the price, whether it's in prison or whether it's in a courtroom for the rest of his life.
How do you explain the success of Operation Warp Speed? That was all Trump. Fauci had nothing to do with it. Well, of course, Fauci was trying to do his job, which is to give the proper rights and analysis. And if you look back on the dark days of the pandemic, the notion that we have made no progress or that we are worse off regarding COVID-19 than we were in the midst of the pandemic. I mean, really, is this rational? James Carville doesn't think so. And he basically, on his own podcast, spoke about the Fauci fury.
The main thing we learned from the release of his personal texts or emails or whatever it was is we didn't learn anything. This was basically an honest guy trying to deal with a once in a millennium public health issue who did, by the way, there is no evidence that he tried to make any money off of it. There was no evidence he was recommending one thing or another for everything you do. But I don't think the guy really made any mistakes. And I think the biggest mistake, the headline mistake he made, was totally justified by his answer.
That is a little bit more realistic.
The Medved Show. MichaelMedved.com.
The senator from Alabama, the one and only Tommy Tuberville, criticized Anthony Fauci, Dr. Fauci, because he thought he was in charge. Well, truth was, he was in charge. He was the director of U.S. attempts to confront and overcome a deadly, very deadly virus. And his title was Director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, and also Chief Medical Advisor to the President. The New York Times has a piece about this diary, which has caused so much attention and drawn so much attention, a piece by Sean McCreish. And he writes that more than 1,100 pages long and dating from 2019 to 2022, Dr. Fauci's diary reads like a black comedy of manners in which a 79-year-old social climbing scientist becomes the face of the government's response to a pandemic and then the toast of the town, the toast of this town, Washington, D.C. As the death toll rises, writes McCreish, so too does the doctor's status and self-regard. He falls in with a fast crowd and becomes consumed by his own image. It's like Thackeray's Vanity Fair crossed with The Plague by Camus. In entry after entry, writes McCreish, he chronicles his years on the Washington party circuit. He sips champagne in galas thrown in his honor and gets mobbed for selfies at joints like Cafe Milano. Barbara Streisand calls and calls, Julia Roberts sends flowers, Billy Crystal, Elton John, Brad Pitt, and Robert De Niro are mentioned. Yeah, because they also want to see a chance for overcoming this pandemic. Back then, has it really been 6 years, writes McCreesh, Dr. Fauci became an overnight celebrity when the pandemic struck and the nation looked to somebody, anyone, who could provide answers. It was a terrifying time, and in this most credentialed doctor, who had served many presidents and valiantly battled the AIDS crisis, lots of Americans found a foil to President Trump, who was at the time suggesting people play around with bleach. The doctor worked around the clock, appearing anywhere he could to spread the message about slowing the spread and getting the shot. Now, in terms of getting the shot, the idea that was effective and important, that it wasn't part of a murder conspiracy. Liz McDonald of Fox Business fortunately stood up and countered some of the charges by Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama, and sounded like this on Fox Business. This is clip 9.
This guy gets Weasel of the Year award. I mean, he will eventually end up either broke or in prison, because I'll tell you what's going to happen. I'm eventually going to be the governor of Alabama. And we had the most of anybody per capita of dying in this country. And we're going to sue the heck out of this guy. He's going to court every day of his life for the rest of his life. And he's going to have to look these people in the face, these families, because the pardon does not cover state government. And we're going to go after him with everything we've got, because the guy killed or had something to do with killing 9 million people. Yeah,
we can't prove that, right? But that's yet to be determined, how many people are due to that.
We can determine it. No, we can determine it because he was in on the gain of function. He was
You're saying you can determine it. We understand that, yeah.
Okay, again, that we can determine the numbers. There weren't 9 million people in the whole world who were killed. In the United States, there have been 103,436,829 confirmed cases of COVID-19, with 1,238,563 confirmed deaths. And again, there is a very real question that rather than the concern for school children and for people of a very young age, that we would have been better focusing on the beginning for focusing on older people who were particularly vulnerable to the pandemic. But the idea of spending a lifetime to try to make sure that Dr. Fauci goes to jail for the rest of his life, he's 85 years old, is such a strange waste of time for a country with the troubles that we have right now. Stephen Miller went on to Fox News and spoke about the Fauci fracas, the Fauci fury, and the depth and the frustrating nature of these hearings focused on Dr. Fauci. Here's Stephen Miller, White House aide.
President Trump saved America from a Great Depression by fighting against those who wanted to shut down the schools and shut down our way of life. He fought to reopen the government. And if you remember the Biden campaign in 2020, spent hundreds of millions of dollars demonizing President Trump for fighting to keep America open at every single step. Every day the news cycle was the so-called healthcare establishment attacking President Trump for questioning the experts. And President Trump at the same time moved heaven and earth because there were people who did have pre-existing conditions, they had comorbidities, who did need help. He moved heaven and earth to get our hospitals the equipment and materials they need, which is why we had a vastly lower death rate than all the other developed nations of the world. So I salute President Trump for what he achieved, and I'm glad that America got to see in the hearing today exactly why President Trump fought the healthcare establishment the way that he did, and why today Bobby Kennedy is the Secretary of Health, because President Trump has always put families and patients before the so-called healthcare government experts who oftentimes have an agenda of their own.
By the way, he mentions Bobby Kennedy. In this New York Times piece, they report Robert F. Kennedy Jr., one of Dr. Fauci's primary antagonists. It was after Mr. Kennedy took over at the Department of Health and Human Services that Dr. Fauci's diary was discovered on government servers. The health secretary promptly handed it over to another Fauci foe, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. Republicans of Kentucky who made it public over the weekend. Dr. Fauci is being called to testify on Capitol Hill before the Senate Homeland Security Committee, which Senator Paul chairs. Through a representative, Dr. Fauci declined to comment for this article, just as he has declined to answer questions invoking the Fifth Amendment. This gets into a very intense viewpoints about Dr. Fauci, which there have been since the pandemic was at its peak. But can we at least get the numbers a little bit correct? And rather than exaggerating the rate, the number of American deaths by about 10 to 1, because there is truth and an untruth in this. And also coming up, we'll talk about the socialist surge. Will it really be doom for the Democrats? Matt Bai of Rolling Stone magazine thinks it could mean doom for the Democrats, which would be a damaging prospect to a country which needs a two-party system with two credible parties, one would hope. We will get to that and to much more coming up in what remains this greatest nation on God's green earth.